Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, we are speaking about much more than a novel. We are speaking about one of those extraordinary moments when literature leaves the pages of a book and enters history, politics, religion, and eventually violence. Very few novels of the 20th century produce consequences comparable to those generated by this book after its publication in 1988. Salman Rushdie became internationally famous, but he also became the target of death threats. And on February 14, 1989, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran, issued the famous fatwa calling for Rushdie's death and for action against people involved in the publication of the novel. It is important to be precise about this because Rushdie was not sentenced to death by an ordinary court after a judicial trial. What occurred was a religious and political decree whose consequences would dominate his life for decades. But to understand why this happened, we must forget the controversy for a moment and return to the novel itself, because millions know the title, while relatively few know what the book actually contains. The novel begins with an unforgettable image. Two Indian men, Jibril Farishta and Saladin Chamcha, are falling from the sky after an aircraft explodes above the English Channel. They fall thousands of meters and somehow survive. From that extraordinary opening, Rushdie tells us that normal realism will not govern the story. We are entering a world of magical realism, dreams, hallucinations, transformations and symbols. This strange beginning is important because the Satanic Verses is fundamentally a novel about transformation, about what happens when human beings leave one world and enter another when they migrate. Saladin Chamcha is an Indian actor who desperately wants to become English. He does not simply want to live in England, he wants to belong completely to England. He changes his accent and tries to escape from his origins. His profession is significant because he is a man of voices, an actor capable of imitating identities, and yet beneath lies a profound question. If you spend your life in other people's voices, what happens to your own voice? Saladin believes that becoming someone new requires rejecting the person he once was, and much of his journey is about discovering that identity cannot be constructed so easily. Jibril Farishta is very different. He is a famous Indian film actor who has frequently played religious characters, and after surviving the fall, he begins to experience increasingly intense dreams and hallucinations. He sometimes believes himself to be the Archangel Gabriel, and the boundary between dream and reality gradually disappears. It is inside these dreams that Rushdie introduces the material that would make the novel notorious. This point is essential. Rushdie does not write a conventional historical biography of the Prophet Muhammad, and he does not write a theological treatise. Instead, religious history appears inside the dreams of a fictional character. Rushdie changes names and circumstances. A fictional city called Yahilia resembles Mecca, and a religious leader called Mahund clearly evokes the Prophet Muhammad. The name Mahund itself was extremely controversial. Within these dream sequences, Rushdie begins to explore one of the most sensitive questions, the nature of revelation. Where does revelation come from? How does a prophet distinguish the voice of God from another voice? What happens when divine revelation enters the human world of politics, commerce, ambition, and conflict? Rushdie approaches these questions through satire and ambiguity, but for many it was an attack upon the sacred. The title of the novel comes from the controversial tradition known as the Satanic Verses episode. According to a disputed account, Muhammad allegedly recognized 3 goddesses before later rejecting those words as from Satan. In the novel, the uncertainty becomes central. Where did the words come from? Were they genuinely revealed? For many Muslims, this was offensive because it appeared to question the reliability and sacred nature of revelation itself. The controversy arose because he took sacred history and placed it inside a structure based upon irreverence. There were other passages that generated enormously anger. One concerns a brothel in Jahiliyyah, where prostitutes take the names of the Prophet's wives. Although clearly satirical, it was regarded by many as a grave insult. Another crucial episode involves Salman the Persian, a fictionalized scribe responsible for writing down Mahund's revelations. Salman begins secretly changing small words while transcribing them in order to test whether Mahund notices. When the changes pass unnoticed, Salman becomes increasingly doubtful. Rushdie is raising a literary and philosophical question. When divine words are transmitted through human beings, where does revelation end and human interpretation begin? These passages explain the outrage, but they are not the entire novel. In fact, most of the Satanic Verses is concerned with something broader: migration, identity, exile, racism, love, and the difficulty of belonging. After surviving their fall, Gabriel and Saladin undergo transformations. Gabriel develops angelic characteristics, while Saladin begins physically resembling a devil. Rushdie uses these fantastic transformations symbolically. Saladin, who has tried to become English, suddenly discovers that English society can still perceive him as foreign and threatening. He becomes monstrous because he is treated as an outsider. This is one of the most important themes. What happens to a migrant who tries desperately to belong and is still told that he does not belong? Can we become someone new without destroying the person we were before? Jibril faces the opposite problem. Instead of attempting to control his identity, he gradually loses control of it. His dreams, religious visions, jealousy, and mental instability become increasingly indistinguishable. The relationship between Jibril and Saladin becomes one of revenge. Saladin uses his extraordinary talent for voices to make telephone calls that increase Jibril's jealousy. Again, we return to the central symbol, the voice. Gibril hears voices, Saladin imitates voices, Mahund receives revelation through a voice, Salman changes words. Throughout, Rushdie asks the same question: who is speaking and why do we believe that voice? In this sense, the Satanic Verses is not simply a novel about Islam, it is a novel about the authority of language. A voice can create faith, identity, or destruction. Words can transform reality, and this became extraordinarily prophetic in relation to Rushdie's own life because eventually, a few words, spoken thousands of kilometers away, transformed his existence. The novel appeared in September 1988 and protests quickly spread. The book was banned in several countries. Demonstrations took place and copies were publicly burned. Religious and political leaders became involved. Then, on February 14, 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini issued the fatwa. At that moment, the controversy changed completely. The question became whether a writer could be threatened with death because of what he had written. Rushdie went into hiding under British police protection and spent years living under extraordinary security. The controversy became an international diplomatic crisis. People associated with the publication were attacked. The Japanese translator, Hitoshi Igarashi, was murdered in 1991. Italian translator Ettore Capriolo was attacked. Norwegian publisher William Nygaard was shot. This was never merely an abstract discussion about literature. And decades later, in August 2022, Rushdie himself was brutally attacked while preparing to speak on stage in New York State, suffering life-changing injuries. People were actually attacked. And this is where we must distinguish very carefully between understanding religious offense and justifying violence. One can understand why many considered these passages deeply offensive without accepting violence. The believer has the right to say, "This profoundly insults my religion." The writer has the right to defend his work, the reader has the right to read it, but nobody acquires the right to kill because he has been offended. From a legal perspective, it is important because freedom of expression does not mean freedom from criticism. What it cannot mean is that one party may physically eliminate the other. This became the central issue. The novel remains relevant because the controversy resembles the cultural conflicts we see on the internet. A passage is removed from context and judged by millions who have never read the complete work. Groups form immediately. The controversy became larger than the novel. Perhaps the simplest lesson is that we should read before we judge. We should understand who is speaking, whether it is author or character, reality or dream, literal or satirical. There is an extraordinary irony. The fatwa probably made the book far more famous. Censorship frequently produces this paradox. The forbidden book becomes irresistible, and the attempt to destroy an idea gives it enormous publicity. But behind the political controversy, we should return once more to the human story, because Saladin's journey eventually brings him back to India. He discovers that becoming someone new does not require destroying everything before. Gibril's story moves in the opposite direction. Tragic collapse versus recovering humanity. This reversal tells us nothing is as simple as it appears. Angel and devil, believer and unbeliever. Rushdie constantly destabilizes these categories. That literary instinct helps explain the danger. For Rushdie, everything can be questioned. For critics, certain things cannot be transformed because they are sacred. That is the fundamental collision at the heart of the controversy. Who owns a sacred story? Can religion be satirized? Secularity says yes. Traditionalism may say no. The purpose of law is not to force agreement, but to make disagreement possible without violence. The novel is about transformation, and its own history became a transformation. Rushdie wrote fiction, and it became a political crisis. He wrote about words, and a leader's voice changed his life. His story crossed every border. If we wanted to summarize, it begins with two migrants falling from the sky and becomes an exploration of what happens when human beings fall between identities. Their transformations represent the instability of identity. Inside Gibril's dreams, Rushdie reconstructs material associated with early Islam, including the disputed tradition, Mahund, and the provocative episode involving the Prophet's wives. Those passages generated enormous outrage. That outrage became international, and in February 1989, Khomeini issued the fatwa calling for Rushdie's death, but perhaps the final lesson of this story is simpler than all of its theological and literary complexities. A book can be offensive and still have a right to exist. A believer can be profoundly offended and still have a right to express that outrage. Freedom does not require agreement. It requires the ability to survive disagreement. A mature society does not answer books with bullets. It answers books with other books. It answers criticism with criticism. Because the moment violence decides which ideas may be expressed, the argument is over and fear takes its place. The question remains, can people with radically different ideas live together without trying to silence one another? That question is larger than Rushdie, larger than Islam, larger than literature. It is central to modern civilization. The answer must ultimately be that disagreement is not the enemy. Violence is. No civilization can genuinely call itself free unless it can protect the possibility of disagreement. Thank you very much.